Morning, everyone. Good to see you. I see many familiar faces. I see the guys from UniSuper, welcome, and I see a lot of people from NAB as well, car sales, and Tabcorp. My name is Jet. I'm tax practice lead at UniSuper, and it's a great honor to be presenting today about infrastructure and environment testing with InSpec. So just a couple of words about my employer. I want to be employed after the next few years up at UniSuper if possible. UniSuper is a dedicated super fund for the higher education and research sector with about $80 billion worth of assets under management. It's actually one of the largest super fund you may or may not have heard of in the past. It's an awesome super fund. I'm a member myself. It's, as you can see, it's won some really big industry prizes. That's something. UniSuper has been a very passionate supporter of the testing community throughout the years, through sponsorship in meetups and from conferences such as Testing Talk. Our purpose is to be the best value super fund in Australia, and to achieve that, we've got a technical transformation ongoing at the moment. And with that, we've got plenty of open roles at the moment across delivery and engineering. So if you're interested in working for financial services, if you want to be part of an industry leader, check out our careers page. Agenda, very simple. First, I'm going to talk about the need for infrastructure and environment testing, or at least for us. Then I'm going to be talking about InSpec as a tool, followed by some live demos. I did pray to the demo about 10 days ago, so hopefully everything still works. Testing pyramid. That's not what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about the environment pyramid, right? So if you think about testing in its traditional sense, at least, a lot of it applies to the application layer. So you might have your application code, you might have your authentication code, you might have application integration with third-party systems, so on and so forth. That's all cool, that's very useful. But what you also have is platform and infrastructure. So by platform, I'm referring to databases, right? I'm referring to your CI/CD integration, your alerting and monitoring system, your backups. By infrastructure, I'm referring to your storage, your compute, and your networking. Whether it's on-prem or on cloud, lucky for you car sales, you're completely on cloud, I heard, or it's a hybrid. Is this you? I just wasted an hour testing something because an environment issue. By environment, I'm referring to application, platform, or infrastructure. Or that. 5%, worse than 50%, 5% of my tests, automated API tests, failed because of some amazing firewall changes. Who gets told when a firewall change happens, just out of curiosity? Not very common, right? And that's because you actually, it's very common to see in larger, enterprises, the ecosystem or the environment is very complex. Typically, you will have some on-prem applications that's from legacy that's built 20, 30 years ago. Then you have a digital front-end that's maybe deployed on Amazon or Azure or Google. And you have integration with a lot of third parties, right? And often what you find is because of segregation of duty, especially in, regulated industries such as banks or insurance companies, you actually have different teams who look after your infrastructure, your networking, and your alerting and system, and so on and so forth. So as a tester, what that means is when you are inevitably hit with an environment issue, you might get some perhaps not so unreasonable, criticism. So you say it's an environment issue, right? What do you actually mean by environment issue? Can you justify it? Can you be more specific? Can you narrow it down? If not, guess what? It can be seen as fake news. Now, this is particularly true when you're dealing with handcrafted environments. Guess what? You might have some automated assets that automate parts of the pipeline or ecosystem, but if it's not fully orchestrated, if it's not fully tested, then you're just at the mercy of your brittle environment. Now, just to share some stats. So at UniSuper, we finished a pretty massive project about 9 months ago, over more than a year. It's a core system. And we did a bit of analysis at the end of the project. We had about 1,180 or 1,200 defects throughout the life cycle of the project. And when we broke down the category of the defects, we found if you add up configuration and the environment, we had about 50%, that's 600 defects, that related to environment issues one way or another. That's very expensive, right? And what tends to happen is when the defect was found, a tester will typically raise to a developer, and because the system is so large and it's so complex, the developer goes to another developer, then perhaps the vendor will get involved, and the managers got involved. It just goes round and round in circles. In this particular case, 20 touch points before an issue or defect was triaged and resolved. So it's a discovery piece that was really killing us at the time. And after we had gone live, guess what? We still had about roughly 100 defects, obviously not critical. But if you look a bit closer to the 100 production defects, roughly 90% of the defects related to environment. And why is that? It's because our production environment is slightly different, it's subtly different to our non-production environments. We do have awesome monitoring at work. Guess what? Because a lot of constraints, whether it's licensing or skills, or just the fact non-production environment is handcrafted to an extent, we just didn't really have that much of a testing or monitoring in our non-production environment, which made the triaging process very, very difficult. Let's look at another angle, right? The DevOps tsunami is well and truly here in technology. What it means is testing, you just cannot just focus on functional testing as we did perhaps in the past. What DevOps testing means is we actually need to be able to test pretty much every single thing that you see up there. And guess what? There's actually tools out there that support you to actually do that, and InSpec being one of them. It's only when companies achieve certain level of maturity can they actually stride towards shift-right testing, i.e. testing closer and closer eventually in production, to reduce cycle time and to bring value quicker to the customers. Let's look at InSpec. So InSpec is an open source framework created by the folks at Chef, which is still a major player in the configuration management automation, market. It's written in Ruby. Now, don't let that discourage you. I had never done Ruby before. I don't actually like it for some bizarre reason. But anyway, it's actually quite simple. I'll show you what that looks like. Open source project as you expect, but it's very active. Obviously not as many stars as Puppeteer, for example, 2,000 versus 50,000. But it's very active. So it's had about over 7,000 commits in the last 3.5 years. And I guarantee you get at least one release every single month, which is pretty good. So why InSpec? First, it's platform agnostic. What that means is you can test against different versions of your operating systems. So at work at UniSuper, we've got a mix of Windows 7, believe it or not, Windows 10, Windows 2012, 2016, and Linux, right? InSpec supports that. You can test against Mac, you can test against Docker containers, you can test with your favorite cloud platforms as well. Second, InSpec allows you to test either locally or remotely. So let's say if you want to test a single service deployed on a single server, right? You can actually have the test executed on the server itself. Or, in reality, if you have a large application with a lot of servers, with a lot of services, with a lot of integration, you can actually run the test from a single location, remotely checking all your dependencies. It's free to run, right? And it's very extensible. Now, I'm going to do some demos. The first test I'm going to do is to run some checks against my local environment, Windows. This normally takes about 10 seconds. There we go, 12.6 seconds. Now let's look a bit closer as to what I've tested. So first thing first, I've got a very simple test. It's just to make sure the OS is Windows. Yeah? And then I'm verifying a critical service, in this case Xbox Live Game Save, I think, is installed, it's enabled, and it's running. Great. The next, I'm verifying some files that matter to me. So I'm verifying Node.js is installed and verifying, for example, my Windows sub Linux system is actually in place. Then I run some PowerShell stuff. Now let's look at the code, just to show you how simple the code is. The first test, can you see it from the back? Yeah. The first test is verify my OS equals Windows. Simple, yeah? Second test, verify my services is installed, it's enabled, it's running. Followed by files. In here, I've got my files stored in a YAML file in here. So all I'm doing is basically iterating through this YAML file and verify every single line is been checked. And next, I'm checking disk. Now, because let's imagine, as I mentioned before, if we don't actually have proper monitoring system installed or don't have proper agents installed, it's actually very simple to write a bit of PowerShell in this case to figure out how much disk I've got remaining. Because chances are, if you're not treating your logs with the respect they deserve and the disk fills up, your service probably will stop running. And the same goes for memory. Now, I'm going to run some tests against my remote machine. In this case, I've got my VM set up, Ubuntu in VirtualBox, so I'm going to run some tests. Cool, something's failed, right? So let's look at a bit closely as to what I've done. In fact, let's look at the code. File, same as before, as for Windows. So I'm checking the files exists. I'm checking the type of the file. I'm checking the size, the owner, the permission, and the content of the file. I'm checking some services. In this case, I'm checking. Let me just double check what I'm checking. I'm checking Apache 2 is installed. I'm checking SSH is installed. And they're running. Memory, because guess what? I don't have PowerShell anymore in my Windows. So I'm calling a bit of bash to calculate how much memory I've got. HTTP, basic, right? So I've got a local HTTP website set up. And all it's doing is make sure that this website is returning 200 OK, and that the HTML body contains a string. In this case, testing talk is awesome. Next, I'm checking firewall. Now, there's different ways of checking the firewall. So if you know it's a server that you want to make sure you've got connectivity to and from, you can specify the server DNS and the port. Or in this case, I just want to make sure that I can actually reach outside. i.e., I can reach Google from my VM. Last but not least, I'm checking some, a test for my Docker images and containers to make sure I've got the right images and they are all running. Now, if you look at what has failed, you can see pretty much my containers are not running, right? So just to prove the checks actually work, I'm going to start my containers. So I've got my password wrong. Try again. Cool. Cool. My containers have started. Everything's green. As a tester, I love seeing green. I hate red. Cool, let's try something else. So, as testers, as mentioned, I gave an example about firewall changes, right? I'm personally impacted by firewall changes every now and then. Guess what? We don't necessarily get comms sent out when they make firewall changes. And if they did, I probably wouldn't understand everything just because our network topology is very complex, right? So now I'm going to make a firewall change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop all outbound traffic on port 443 so that I can't reach Google on my box. And because I don't want to run everything, because it still takes 14 seconds, I can just run the individual test. So this one's going to take just over 30 seconds, just because it actually waits 30 seconds before timing out. But if you look at the test, it's actually, or the command rather, it's very simple actually. So InSpec, that's the name of the program. Exec, that's the command. And my tests are stored in a folder called Ubuntu 16. And the protocol I'm using is SSH. So I'm testing over SSH against my local host with the username password supplied. And that's the control. So with InSpec, you can specify individual control, that's in the name of the test, or you can specify a regular expression, so if you want to run multiple tests at once. I wonder what they're talking about next door, right?
I think it's related to that tweet we had up there.
Possibly. There's a lot of reference about directors, Australian economy, I think.
Electing.
Something important, I'm sure. There we go, test failed. So what it says is, I'm expecting a 200 response. Instead, I've got nothing. Let me just undo the firewall change. Cool, and I'm going to stop my containers. Cool. Let's go back to the presentation. Luckily, the demo works. I won't be playing the videos. So just a quick recap. What has been tested? For Windows, which is my local system, the operating system, I can test a lot more if I wanted to. I tested the service, I tested some file properties, and then I invoked a bit of PowerShell. For my remote service or my remote machine, I tested files, content, ownership, service status. I invoked a bit of bash command, and I did some HTTP checks, whether it's local or remote. And last but not least, I checked some statuses for my Docker images and Docker containers. You might ask, what else can be checked? There's a ton of things that can be checked. So I'm not going to repeat everything. I'm not going to read out everything, but everything from your database, whether it's permission, whether it's group permission, whether it's authorization, whether it's AD integration, to your certs, about expiry, and so on and so forth, to some of your popular services with your favorite cloud providers. Reporting. Wouldn't be a nice framework without proper reporting these days, right? So InSpec actually supports multiple formats in terms of the report it generates. So you get HTML. So it actually shows you what's passed and what's failed, and it highlights what's actually failing. And you get a nice JSON document as well, if you wanted to. Now, with JSON document, there's so much more you can do. You can do a lot of post-processing. Now, you might ask, why do I bother about post-processing? Let me give you another demo. I've got a dashboard set up. Let's say I don't care about the granular level details. I do, but not in the demo. I've got my Windows checks. That's one category of checks. And I've got my Ubuntu checks, right? So everything's green, hunky-dory, all good. Remember how I killed my Docker containers? So I'm expecting the test to fail now, right? So I've got a Jenkins job set up. All I need to do is to run the build, i.e. execute the tests. Look at that, job finished in seconds, no minutes. And if I refresh dashboard, because I'm impatient to wait, I see red. How cool is that, right? Now I'm gonna start my containers just to prove this is not a fake thing. Do another build. Test done. All green. So if you are working in an environment where your application in context is very, very complex with a lot of dependencies, you can easily create a dashboard with data from InSpec or your actual functional tests. So when people walk in, they don't have to ask you, okay, why are they taking so long to test? You can say, guess what? My firewall dependencies is not being met, or I've got some issues with my services. It's all about visibility. What else can you do with InSpec? A ton of other things. For example, DevSecOps. Now what that means is you can actually run a bunch of checks against some known good profiles. So for example, I ran a check just last night against my Ubuntu image. Guess what? It's picked up a lot of issues. So for example, it's saying, as good practice, the maximum password expiry period should be set to 60 days. But because I hadn't changed anything with my Ubuntu image, it's set to 99,999 days. If anyone is interested, it's 273 years. So you can actually check how good or compliant your environment is, which is pretty awesome. And it works with Windows as well as your cloud EC2 instances. All right, so just a bit of summary. Why do we need to test infrastructure and environment? For us at UniSuper, number one, it allows us to check the environment. It gives us a health check before any functional tests commence, whether it's manual or automated. Just because we have a very complex system, and we haven't actually migrated fully to the cloud, it's very, very brittle. And it does the testing really well and does it really quick. As you probably saw earlier, if you remember, those checks took seconds, not minutes. And it's very simple and consistent when you write the tests. What that means is, even if you are not perhaps a very technical tester, you can get into writing some tests, automated tests, very, very easily. Because the language is very simple, it's intuitive. It can be picked up by manual testers or infrastructure engineers. It demystifies environment issues. So no longer a project manager will have to come to a tester to say, can you tell us what exactly the environmental issue is? Just because we can actually create very granular checks that basically provides a spec of how system is meant to be set up. Third, enables continuous testing of infrastructure and platform. So as we start creating our infrastructure as code, there's no reason why A, we shouldn't test it, and B, it shouldn't be written as code as well. So this really aligns well with the IAC concept. Last but not least, gives us a new capability in terms of being able to automate our compliance and security tests. And that's it. Any questions? Yes, mate?
Do you have to put an agent onto the Ubuntu box?
No. So the way it works is InSpec basically over SSH runs the test from my machine, in this case Windows. It checks remotely against my Ubuntu box. So you don't actually need to install InSpec or anything else. So in terms of getting it up and running, All you need to do is open up a couple of firewall ports, and that's pretty much it. And if you're using Windows, you have to, I guess, adjust your AD setting to allow remote execution. Cool. No other questions?
Yes, I have one question.
Yep.
So we wrote something like 1 to 16. So both a VM running on your local system.
Yep.
So you map your local VM ID with the name for 1 to 16, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So in case of cloud infrastructure, when we are handling the case of like upscaling, so in that case, we don't know like what will be the IP of the new server that we are spinning up. So
Yep.
how do you handle that?
So depending on what you want to achieve, in my personal experience, if you're just concerned about if your, I guess, VM that you create dynamically is compliant, you can actually install InSpec as a service as part of the SOE. You can run tests locally. If not, I guess you can always use, for example, your CloudFormation or your Amazon kit to actually figure out the IP addresses. So all you're going to do is set up the networking to make sure you can actually remotely check the resources.
So a new step will be added, a layer of step will be added before this execution, like just to get this configuration.
Yes. Yep. Yes.
Is it possible to automate the checks for the application configurations in this tool?
Sorry, say again?
Application configuration. So when we deploy an application on the environment,
Yep.
we change the configs very often, which can lead to test failures.
Yep.
This tool can be also used for testing the configuration.
So by application configuration, if you're referring to, for example, the files, the permissions, the databases, absolutely. It just really depends on what exactly you want to test. But one thing hopefully I managed to highlight is because this framework is very extensible, it's very flexible, even if there's not a resource that comes out of the box with InSpec, you can invoke your PowerShell, you can invoke your bash, you can call your Kubernetes control program to actually test things out. Yes?
You mentioned that this tool can be used to test the YAML files. Is it possible to do the testing on the YAML definitions, API spec definitions?
You can, although I probably wouldn't do it like that, just because it's a separation concern. It's like, can you actually use this to call your Selenium, to call your Cypress or Node.js application? You can, because at the end of the day, this is written in Ruby, so you can do whatever you want that is supported by Ruby as a programming language. But is that the best way of doing things? It may not be. So the way we use it at UniSuper is that as part of our pipeline, when we make a change, whether it's a infrastructure change or an application configuration change, we run the test just to make sure basically the environment is healthy before we kick off our manual or automated testing. Right? And as we build out new platform with Ansible in this case, we're also making sure that the right connectivity exists and configuration exists in the right fashion. That's how we use it.
Yeah. I have one more question.
Yep.
In one of the test cases, you shown something like Node.js is installed or not.
Yep.
And we were just checking the file, if that exe or some executable file is present or not.
There's different ways of checking, so that was a very simple checks. So if you want to, so I guess depending on how you want to check it, so you can check your registry, you can check if certain files are in place, you can check the file size, you can check if services installed, you can check properties. The ton of things you can check, it just really depends on, it's like with the problem we've got with automation, how best do you solve it? My advice will be try to align it with your infrastructure as code as closely as possible.
Just wanted your suggestion, like, is this a good idea to put like Node version so that we also get the like Node version as an outcome, and we are making sure like we are doing one more check if the correct Node version is like installed or not, something like this.
Yes, I think so. Then again, I'd look at how that's going to be changed. For example, if you have got proper code to create your infrastructure, then perhaps it's not a need to actually verify the version of Node you've got installed, but you might be actually be checking, for example, do all the dependencies that make a Node work, are they all installed correctly? Or would the users that get provisioned automatically have the right access to run Node programs? It really depends. What this tool does is give you a flexible framework that allows you to test, I guess, the way it fits for your context. Any other questions? Yes?
Have you measured your defect reduction, your environment defect reduction after applying automated environment infrastructure testing?
In short, no, just because we're hearing less and less about our environment issues. Now, I guess the caveat of that donut chart you saw earlier was, I guess to be fair, it was a large migration project, migrating from one core database to another. So you'd expect more, I guess, environment issues. But the point I was trying to highlight was just because we didn't have something like that before, to get to the bottom of the environment issues was really, really difficult because you tend to run around and ask different people. If we had something like this, when something breaks, we should be able to pinpoint it straight away. Right, I've got a gift card to give out. My question is, can I use InSpec against Amazon Web Services? Yes. I think that gentleman over there was first.
Let's give a round of applause to Jet and Ram.